defense and the prosecution delivered closing arguments yesterday in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett has a recap for us.
The first trial of an American president soon in the hands of 7 men and 5 women. Prosecutors closing their case arguing former President Trump orchestrated a criminal conspiracy to influence the 2016 election, to pull the wool over voters' eyes, they say, by ordering the payoff of Stormy Daniels and then covering it all up. Prosecutor Joshua Stein trying to establish a pattern of Mr. Trump burying damaging stories that could derail his 2016 campaign, pointing to a key conversation secretly recorded by Mr. Trump's then attorney, Michael Cohen, the star prosecution witness, where Mr. Trump discussed an alleged payoff of a different woman, Steinglass calling it jaw-dropping.
So what are we going to think?
Funding, yes. And it's all the stuff.
But much of closings focused on the credibility of Cohen. Quote, "We didn't pick him up at the witness store. The defendant chose Michael Cohen," Steinglass said, acknowledging Cohen's criminal history and admitted lies under oath, but telling jurors, "You don't need Michael Cohen to connect these dots, but as the ultimate insider, he can do just that." The defense has also tried to discredit Cohen as motivated to lie, desperate to put Mr. Trump behind bars, pointing to Cohen's own podcasts.
Revenge is a dish best served cold. And you better believe I want this man to go down and rot inside for what he did to me and my family.
But Steinglass took that head on, arguing Cohen is understandably angry because Mr. Trump dropped him like a hot potato after the feds came calling in 2018, urging jurors to see this case not about Michael Cohen, it's about Donald Trump. In his closing arguments, Trump attorney Todd Blanche tore into the prosecution's case and its reliance on Cohen's testimony, blasting Cohen as the human embodiment of reasonable doubt, branding him the gloat, the greatest liar of all time, and the MVP of liars, saying he lied to Congress, judges, prosecutors, bankers, his family, adding he came in here, raised his right hand, and lied to each of you repeatedly, pointing to one of the trial's most dramatic moments when Cohen was confronted with phone records, suggesting he never spoke to Mr. Trump about Daniels in an October 2016 phone call lasting just 96 seconds, but instead had called Mr. Trump's bodyguard to complain about a teenage prank caller. Blanche arguing he told you he spoke to President Trump. That was a lie, and he got caught red-handed. That is perjury. Blanche striking at the heart of the 34 low-level felony counts Mr. Trump faces for allegedly falsifying his business records, arguing none of the invoices, vouchers, or checks were false, saying the legal retainer language on the records wasn't criminal or sinister, but merely generated by accounting software at the Trump Organization, and there was nothing wrong with it. President Trump is innocent, Blanche said. There is no crime, period.
This is not a trial that should happen. It's a very sad day. This is a dark day in America.
NBC's Laura Jarrett reporting for us there. Here is the timeline for today's proceedings. Judge Juan Merchan will give the jury its instructions at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. That's expected to last about an hour. After that, jury deliberation begins. The judge says the jury will deliberate until about 4:30 this afternoon. Schedules for Thursday and Friday will depend on the jury's progress. Let's bring in former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and former U.S. attorney and MSNBC contributor Chuck Rosenberg. Also with us, of course, the host of Way Too Early, White House bureau chief at Politico, Jonathan Lemire. Good morning to you all. So, Lisa, I'll start with you. You were at your post again yesterday down at the courthouse. So the case from Donald Trump's defense team is Michael Cohen, the star witness, as he believes he is a liar, the greatest liar of all time, as Todd Blanche put it, to which the prosecution said he is. And that's exactly why Donald Trump counted on him to do his dirty deeds. How did it play out in court yesterday?
Well, I think one of the things that is missing from that sort of juxtaposition there is how much other evidence the prosecution has that has absolutely nothing to do with Michael Cohen. So if you listen to Todd Blanche yesterday, Michael Cohen is the central character in this drama. If you listen to Josh Stein yesterday, he's nothing more than a narrator. He's a tour guide through this mountain of evidence. I thought it played pretty well that he acknowledged what Michael Cohen is and was, because he was saying, again, you played this clip from Laura, We didn't pick him up at the witness store. We didn't choose this guy. The defendant chose this guy, and he chose him exactly for the characteristics that his lawyers are telling you now makes him quintessentially untrustworthy. And I thought that was a really good moment for Josh Steinglass, who had a number of very good moments yesterday.
So, Chuck, 3 hours. We talked about this ahead of the closing arguments yesterday about just how long a day. Didn't end till 8 o'clock last night. 3 hours from Donald Trump's defense team, and then almost 5 hours from the prosecution. At the end of the day, what did it add up to for you?
At the end of the day, it added up to about 8 hours.
Thanks, Chuck.
Does math, too.
Yeah, he's very good.
I was told there would be math on this test. I was prepared. Look, I think that's too much. But part of that, Willie, is informed by my own experience as a federal prosecutor in a district where if I had begged for 30 minutes to close a case like this, I would have gotten 20. So I don't know what the right amount is. And I know that prosecutors and defense attorneys, want to say everything they can, because if they leave something unsaid, they will believe that was the thing that made the difference in their case. So I get it. I think it's too much, and I think there's a law of diminishing marginal return.
So, Lisa, walk us through what seemed like an important moment in the courtroom yesterday, where Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, was admonished by the judge, Judge Merchan, because Blanche had sort of said to the jury, look, you might be putting this guy in prison. You might be sending him to jail. The judge said, whoa, 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 like that's not necessarily what's going to happen. Walk us through what happened and why that matters.
So there was an objection to it. It was sustained. The prosecution asked for something called a curative instruction. That's an instruction from the jurors that they're not to take that into consideration. The reason it was so serious is, first of all, Blanche was a very experienced prosecutor. He worked in the Southern District of New York for almost 10 years. As Chuck knows, and even I know, and I was never a prosecutor, you don't mention anything in summations having to do with sentencing. Why? Because that's the province of the judge. The jury has absolutely nothing to do with the sentence. And so by raising the specter of prison, that was a big no-no, particularly given who the defendant is here. Because what Blanche was trying to do was think about who you might be sending to prison. Right. This is the former president of the United States, almost trying to elevate the burden improperly. And so the curative instruction was, you're not to think about this. Sentencing is totally for me to deal with. And there's not necessarily a sentence of imprisonment that would go along with a conviction. Andrew Weissman and I were on air together last night, and he said, if you're the prosecution, that's like the best possible position to be in, because he has lifted that extra burden that Todd Blanche wanted to place on the jury by telling them, you know what, you can convict this guy and he might never do a day in prison. Don't trouble yourself about it.
You know, Chuck, I understand from my preeminent source in this trial, Mika Brzezinski, that there are two lawyers on the jury. So when I start hearing about, Michael Cohen's a lion, Michael Cohen's this, Michael Cohen's that, and everybody's focusing on Michael Cohen, just as a lawyer, and I know Lisa and you also lawyers, what are you thinking about? When you get back there, you're looking at the documents. And again, it seems to me that if you've got two lawyers that are going to be back there, they're going to be saying, okay, it doesn't matter whether you like that guy or not. It's in the documents. We've got the evidence here, whether that evidence acquits Donald Trump or whether it convicts him. I wonder if that's your thought as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, Joe. Look, if I have a good case, good evidence, good documents, good witnesses, all are welcome to the jury. Lawyers, zoologists, I don't care. And also, you can't look at any one person and describe that they would be or would not be a good juror based on their occupation. But I think you're right. I think lawyers take a particularly rigorous approach to analyzing evidence and following instructions. Again, if I have a good case, that's exactly what I want.
So let's look ahead to today, guys. And Lisa, the jury instructions, 10 o'clock this morning, expected to last about an hour. And then it's in the hands of the jury, this case. Why are the jury instructions so important to what happens next?
Because the jury instructions inform how the jurors understand what are sort of complicated charges here. So remember, the charge here isn't about hush money itself. It's about the falsification of business records, and 34 of them in particular. But what makes this a felony is the accusation that these business records were falsified, essentially in service of concealing another crime. And so in that, the jury instructions are going to be critical. What does it mean to have the intent to defraud, for example? To the extent that the prosecution has alleged that that underlying crime as a conspiracy to promote Donald Trump's election through unlawful means, what are those unlawful means? We know, for example, from yesterday that Judge Merchan's final jury instructions allow for the jurors to have not a meeting of the minds, but their own opinion on what those unlawful means are. And there's sort of a grab bag of what they can be. And so the jury instructions here are absolutely critical. In particular, look for an instruction on what it means to falsify business records with an emphasis on the word cause, because Donald Trump has been accused of either falsifying the records himself or causing them to be falsified. And Josh Stein really emphasized yesterday this cause aspect of it. It doesn't matter that Trump may have never seen the invoices or the general ledger entries. If he set this whole thing into motion, he caused Alan Weisselberg to instruct Jeff McConney, to instruct other people to make these business records in a certain way. That will be enough, so long as the jury instructions make clear to the jury that that's how they can find what it means to falsify.
Interesting. Lisa, I have a question for you, but first I want to read from Chuck's new opinion piece in U.S. News and World Report. It's entitled, "Even if he's guilty, Trump could be acquitted. Justice would still be served." And you write in part, quote, this, Chuck, "To me as a former federal prosecutor, the evidence is compelling that Trump directed a plot to conceal the alleged tryst from voters during the 2016 presidential election. And if Trump is acquitted, or if there is a hung jury, no matter how you feel about his innocence or guilt, that is okay. Our justice system is imperfect. Any endeavor that includes human beings is imperfect. We ask juries to listen and deliberate. We ask them to serve as the conscience of our community. We ask them, we empower them to determine whether a defendant is guilty as charged, and we must live with that decision whether we agree or disagree with it."
So, and Chuck, let's just take this one layer deeper, sort of an inception thing here. Even if he is convicted, there are a lot of legal minds out there that think he's got a pretty good appeal on legal grounds. Forget the facts, but on legal grounds on whether this case should have been brought in the first place or not. So again, the wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind fine. Again, it's not a slam dunk. This is not a basketball game. It's a process that over time, as you said, works regardless of the outcome.
I believe that's right. I tried dozens of cases, Joe, as a federal prosecutor. Number one, I couldn't predict what the jury would do in any of them, although in the overwhelming majority of those cases, the jury convicted. But when they don't convict, and it was painful because I still to this day believe in the cases that I brought in which the jury acquitted. And that's painful because I feel as if there was a injustice, but that's not really accurate. When the jury decides, it decides. Everybody in the system knows that's final, putting aside the appeal that you just discussed, Joe. And that's okay. We live with it. That's our system. We ought to be proud of it. It's flawed, and it's still the best system in the world. Justice is a self-defining concept. Whether acquitted or convicted, the jury has spoken, and we must accept that. All citizens must accept that.
Yep. It's that acceptance is really important. I couldn't agree with you more, Chuck. Lisa, another factor of this, everyone's of course talking about this is whatever the jury decides, waiting to see what this jury will come up with. But one thing you've also been studying in court is the judge. It's impossible not to. It's such an important player in all of this, and what his experience has been throughout all of this. Just studying him, how do you think he's going to be? You've already made it clear that his instructions, you expect them to be specifically clear, especially around certain subjects. But if they can't decide, how long can he keep them in there, and would he?
It's a difficult question to know, Mika, but I think what he will do is encourage them to continue to deliberate. If they indicate that they're having trouble, encourage them to deliberate until they are absolutely positive that no more movement can happen. This is a judge who has earned the respect of observers in the courtroom for his demeanor. He has the quintessential judicial temperament, and that should pay real dividends with the jury in particular. All juries love the judges that are in charge of them. That's sort of just a bug and a feature of our judicial system, because the judges are the ones who care and feed for them. But my expectation is that this particular jury really has affection for Judge Merchan, who has been solicitous of their well-being throughout, has maintained an even temper through even the most trying of times. And so if he says to them, I am going to encourage you to go back to the jury room and continue to deliberate, I think that they will take that seriously, unless there's absolutely no possibility that they can reach a verdict. Now, of course, there are 34 counts here, and so one possibility is that they convict on certain counts and hang on others, and that may be a situation where he is more than willing to let them come back hung on certain counts. In particular, because Donald Trump signed 9 of the checks, one possibility here is that you see a mixed verdict where the jury comes back and says, you know what, we're going to hold him accountable for the counts having to do with the checks he personally signed. On some of the others, we're having trouble reaching agreement, Your Honor.
So, Chuck, let's go back to your experience as a prosecutor, what it is like now to have made your case, to have made your closing argument. It's in the hands of the jury to try to look in their faces, to try to read their reactions over the course of all these weeks. What is it like to sit and wait as a prosecutor who feels he has made his case to see what the jury will decide?
Absolutely flipping miserable. I hated it, because there's nothing you can do at that point, really. It's out of your hands entirely. And so what I mostly did was pace the halls. I'd wander into the courtroom and back out. I tried to eat lunch, but I couldn't. I tried to turn my attention to the next case, but I couldn't. You know, it's funny. I've had juries come back quickly where I thought it was a complex case and it would take them a long time. I've had juries take a long time where I thought it was a simple case. But to answer your question, miserable.
So, Chuck, quick follow on that. It's impossible to predict any particular jury, but from your experience, a case like this, how long it took, the number of counts involved, give us even an approximate as to how long these jury deliberations might take. What should we expect?
My only sense of that, Jonathan, is that you have 34 counts and lots of documents, and they're going to work through it methodically. There's a bit of folklore attached to, verdict Friday. Jurors often will reach a verdict at the end of a week, so they don't have to come back next week. But that's not a rule. That's
New York Times, which spoke to weapons experts and reviewed visual evidence. While the attack received international condemnation, Israel is still pushing forward with its offensive in the southern Gaza city. NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez has the latest.
We say smash into Rafah with large units, and we still believe that. And we haven't seen that.
Now, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, he's author of the weekly newsletter Home and Away, available on Substack. Richard, good morning. Always great to have you at the table with us. So let's talk about this red line. Admiral Kirby saying yesterday what we saw outside of Rafah in that refugee camp where 45 to 50 refugees were killed by an Israeli bomb or an explosion that came after the bomb, in really horrific pictures that were making their way around the world. That did not cross the red line. So I mean this is a serious, not a rhetorical question. What is the red line? What does the red line mean, just so everyone watching is clear?
The red Rafah, in some ways, the way Israel had previously gone into Gaza, using large weapons from a distance.
About what happened in that camp. What is the relationship right now with Prime Minister Netanyahu as we see these horrible images?
Yeah, I helped break the story yesterday before Kirby's appearance that the administration decided this did not cross the red line. The relationship with Netanyahu is not good. There's still a lot of bad feelings between the two men, and the administration wishes that Israel would show more caution in its conduct in Rafah. But at the same time, administration officials tell us that they feel like Israel has not gone all the way in yet, in part because of U.S. guidance. And this missile that was used was U.S. supplied, in part because it can be more targeted and to try to avoid incidents like this, tragic incidents like this. We heard from the vice president yesterday, Joe, say this was tragic. But right now, there do not appear, outside of what Kirby said yesterday, a full-on invasion of Rafah. Short of that, there really doesn't seem to be much U.S. objections to what Israel is going to do there. This president is still supportive of the campaign.
Well, and Richard, what happens if Israel, obviously, Richard, the president doesn't want Israel to use a large ordinance, as you said, that they did in the early phase of the war, where Israel was condemned for using massive bombs in civilian areas. At the same time, Richard, what is Israel to do? Are they supposed to just sit there while conditions in Rafah get worse, while the possibility of famine spreads, and while Hamas regroups? Let's just state the obvious. The United States would never do this. We didn't do this in Mosul. We didn't do this in Afghanistan. We didn't do this in Iraq. We didn't do this in Vietnam. We didn't do this in World War II. If we were struck, we struck back until we won the war. So I guess what confuses me is what is it in the United States or Israel's best interest that Israel just sits outside of Rafah and this suffering continues indefinitely, or do they go in and kill Hamas terrorists?
Here's the dilemma, Joe. Israel has obviously decided to continue to degrade Hamas. There's some major military elements of Hamas left. But here's the but. In the course of doing it, you had this sort of incident the other day where 40-plus innocents got killed. That's inevitable. That's, as Mr. Rumsfeld once said, stuff happens, awful stuff happens. Just to really raise the question, should we be supporting a ceasefire, that the benefits of this Israeli operation don't outweigh the cost? Obviously, you're not going to get any hostages back so long as this gets on. And it's still not going to deal with the fundamental challenge of how to govern Gaza, much less the West Bank. So I actually think the first order question is not this red line issue. I think for the administration is whether to come out publicly against what Israel's doing. The Republicans say that. The problem with that argument, Joe, this is a job that cannot be finished. Israel continues to fight a conventional war in an unconventional setting. So I'm not sure that what they're doing, ultimately the benefits will justify the costs.
Right. So Richard, I remember on 9/11 watching the towers fall, and the second that happened, I just knew we were going to war, and eventually Osama bin Laden would be killed. On October 7th, I knew amidst that tragedy, Hamas could never rule Gaza again. So you are correct. They can't eliminate every last Hamas terrorist. But certainly, Israel, the United States, and yes, our Arab neighbors, our Arab allies in that region, would all agree that Hamas can never rule Gaza again. So how do we get to that point?
100%. But in order to do that, you need a comprehensive strategy. Yes, you degrade Hamas, and Hamas has been significantly degraded even without this operation. But then you've got to come up with a political alternative. You've got to build a situation where there's other representation for Palestinians. You've got to build a situation where you have others providing security and delivering services.
It's not a zero-sum game. It's not all or nothing. I guess the question is, at what point does Hamas have to be degraded so the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Emiratis, the United States, our allies can go in, rebuild Gaza, and have an Arab peacekeeping force to keep the peace?
Well, two things, Joe. What's keeping the Saudis and others from going in is not just the remaining strength of Hamas. It's the lack of an Israeli political strategy for what comes after to satisfy at least some Palestinian political aspirations. So only Israel is refusing to put that on the table now, and that's what the Saudis and others need to form an international force. What's missing is something political. Second of all, Hamas could be degraded more. But we shouldn't kid ourselves. Any international force that goes into Gaza is not going to be a peacekeeping force. It's going to be what I would call a peacemaking force. There are still going to be significant pockets and elements of resistance. People are going to get killed doing this. We have to understand that. This is going to require a significant...
Well, Mika, let's not kid ourselves. They also want, before they send their peacekeeping or peacemaking forces in, they want as many Hamas terrorists killed as possible, so their soldiers coming in can actually keep the peace.
And in all of this, barely a mention of the hostages, Richard. Is there any hope for their return? I don't even hear them as part of this conversation.
Miki, you're right. I think what's increasingly the tragic reality is there's probably not a lot of hostages left who are alive. I think that's increasingly the operating assumption. There are people in Israel who's saying, let's just have a ceasefire. We've reached the point of diminishing returns, and let's get the hostages back. Let's get an accounting. Let's get all the hostages back. That is one school of thought. The other, as Joe was suggesting, is allow this to go on longer to further degrade Hamas, in part on the assumption that most of the hostages are never coming back alive. So that consideration has faded. But that's a powerful, still, how to put it, debate within Israel about the priority of the war versus the priority of the hostages. Prime ministers clearly come down on the side of the priority of pursuing the war against Hamas. A lot of other people, military and otherwise, have come down on the other side.
All right, Richard, thank you. Coming up, this is an interesting question. Why was the communication...
Remains with us as our golf expert and analyst on Morning Joe. So it looks like these might go away and that the officer's initial account doesn't quite match up to the video we saw.
That's exactly what it looks like. Quite honestly, these charges never should have been brought. But can we just talk about the golf for a second?
There you go.
The most amazing thing is this guy gets arrested, does a stretching in the jail cell that day, goes out and shoots a 5-under par round. I have seen athletes with...
Yeah, I was scared. I didn't want to go there. But anyway, so 8:30 that morning, Scotty Scheffler's wearing an orange jumpsuit in prison. He's been fingerprinted. He's been booked. He's been photographed. And then the idea, as you mentioned, Richard, he gets in he goes back to the golf course and shoots a 66. The mind game involved in that had to be phenomenal.
It was. He is the world's #1 for good reason. He would have been in the thick of the tournament had it not been for that one round where he had to let down the next day. But again, the idea that we're having this conversation, quite honestly,
it's wonderful.
It's both wonderful and it's preposterous. Given the real issues out there, the idea that the legal machinery, shall we say, of Kentucky is focusing on this when I expect there's 1 or 2 real problems they might have to focus on. Just saying. But you're happy. If you're happy,
aren't you relieved that we're talking about this?
I am, and I'm ready to talk about baseball though.
Oh, wow, moving right along.
All time. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing for the country to realize what we missed because we were such a segregated society. And it's a wonderful thing for all the players and the memories of the Negro League.
It was always said Josh Gibson was the Babe Ruth of the Negro Leagues. Now he's just the Josh Gibson of professional baseball. Okay. One last thing for you, Richard. The New York Yankees, the pitching staff, without Garrett Cole, how about these guys who have picked up the slack and kept us right near the top of the
big surprise
American
of the
League?
season. We're not so surprised that the hitting's come through, Soto, Judge, and the rest. That we were hoping for, predicted. But the pitching without Cole, and the rest of baseball has to think about when Cole, if and when he rejoins the team, he heals, then the Yankees are Yankees against the Orioles, I think, the 2 best teams.
And the prosecution.
Phillies and Dodgers, probably the 2 best teams.
Phillies look amazing.
You got it.
That's a great 4 great teams this year.
Yeah. Sox, how do we feel, guys? Any chance? Wild card, maybe? Make a little run?
That's great.
Those are the 4 great teams in baseball.
Yeah, we've already established that.
Say no more. Say no more. All right, Richard. Go ahead, Jim.
I do want to say I want to ask my 2 Sox friends if they actually saw the game last night. Did either of you guys see the game?
Yeah.
I followed it afterwards. Yeah, I mean, they pitched well. Braille was good. It was a nice win, Mike. I mean, they won in Baltimore. They remain over 500. They're still overachieving. I mean, they're in the mix for the wild card race. No, you and I definitely have overachieved.
We all are overachieving, and none of us was born with an ass.
Just barely, though.
None of us were born with the natural talent. I speak, of course, only of Mike, Jonathan Lemire, and myself, of Ceddanne Rafaela, who made another extraordinary catch last night, going back to the fence a couple of games ago. I mean, again, this is human highlight reel stuff that people will be talking about this kid. And yeah, I think maybe they got a little over their skis last night. The radio announcers, when they were asking whether he may be the greatest center fielder of all time. How old is he? 21, I think. But if he stays healthy, I mean, Mike, this kid is going to light it up, and he's going to win a lot of Gold Gloves.
Yeah, he's not only Gold Gloves, he's actually a platinum glove center fielder so far. Now, you know, he's...
How it works is you got a 98% offset, okay? There's big gaps here is when you're selling a whole bunch of electricity back to the utility company.